For over 1,000 years, the origins of Islam have been presented as a clear and unquestionable story. A single prophet in the 7th century, a perfectly preserved holy book, and a rapidly expanding civilization built on divine revelation. Muslims around the world are taught that this narrative is historically certain, that the Quran was perfectly preserved, that Muhammad's life is well documented, and that the early Islamic story is one of clarity and truth. But over the last few decades, archaeologists, historians, and textual scholars have uncovered something deeply unsettling. The physical evidence from the early Islamic world does not always match the traditional story. Ancient inscriptions, early manuscripts, and archaeological discoveries are raising serious questions about how Islam actually began, and whether parts of its early history were rewritten centuries later. Once you start looking at the evidence, a very different picture begins to emerge. Stone inscriptions from the earliest decades after the Arab conquests offer a direct line to the public messaging of those in power. Across Syria, Palestine, and the Hijaz, dozens of stelae and tomb markers appear, some carved in both Greek and Arabic, others only in the new script that would become early Kufic. Yet a striking pattern emerges. These inscriptions almost never mention Muhammad by name. Instead, they speak of the believers, Mu'minun, or use phrases like the faithful or in the name of God. On a marble base from the northern Levant, bilingual text invokes the unity of God but omits any personal prophet, while the Arabic script itself is in a transitional style, not yet the formal Kufic of later centuries. Scholars debate whether this was a deliberate choice to use neutral language, perhaps to avoid alienating Christian subjects, or simply a sign of religious identity still in formation. The absence of Muhammad's name in these official proclamations stands in sharp contrast to the later tradition, raising unsettling questions about how the early community chose to define itself in the public eye. The evidence carved in stone does not match the clarity claimed in later written histories. Instead, it hints at a story still being negotiated, one that leaves the boundaries of early Islam open to interpretation. Coins from the 1st century after the Arab conquests tell a story that words carved in stone cannot. In the decades after 650 CE, mints across Syria and Persia produced silver drachms and copper foles that carried a mix of old and new symbols. The American Numismatic Society catalogs coins where the imperial cross or sun disk was never fully erased, just overstruck with an Arabic phrase like Bismillah, which means in the name of God. These coins circulated widely, bearing no mention of Muhammad or the title prophet. Instead, they used generic terms like the believers or simple religious slogans. Some issues even kept Christian motifs side by side with early Arabic script, a visual compromise that hints at a gradual transition rather than a sudden break. The fiscal record, unlike later religious texts, shows a world where identity was still in flux, and the lines between faiths were blurred. According to the American Numismatic Society, this hybrid coinage reflects a political strategy as much as a religious one, projecting authority while avoiding alienating Christian subjects. The silence about Muhammad on everyday money stands out, raising questions about how quickly Islamic identity really took hold. The coins do not confirm a fully formed faith. Instead, they suggest a slow, contested evolution, with public symbols lagging behind later Orthodox claims. Hidden inside the walls of the Great Mosque of Sana'a, a discovery in 1972 shook the foundations of Islamic manuscript history. The Sana palimpsest, a parchment layered with 2 separate Quran texts, revealed its secrets only under multispectral imaging decades later. Beneath the visible script, researchers found an earlier version of the Quran, one that does not match the canonical text word for word. In the lower erased layer, verses appear in a different order, with spelling, grammar, and even occasional words diverging from the standard. Some lines are missing, others show additions, and the script itself shifts from early Hijazi to later Kufic styles. Asma Hilali, a leading scholar on the manuscript, describes the palimpsest as evidence of the complexities of Quranic text transmission amidst early Islamic practices. The presence of corrections, marginal notes, and layered overwriting calls into question the idea of a single, unaltered text passed down unchanged. Instead, the Sana'a palimpsest exposes a period of active editing, teaching, and revision, a manuscript that captures the Quran in motion, not yet frozen in its final form. This single artifact, with its visible scars and hidden words, stands as the most direct challenge to claims of perfect preservation, forcing historians to confront the possibility of a more fluid and human process behind the sacred text. The written story of early Islam arrives centuries late. The first complete biography of Muhammad, compiled by Ibn Ishaq around 750 CE, surfaces nearly 120 years after the prophet's death. Even then, his original manuscript vanished, leaving only the edited version by Ibn Hisham, produced another 80 years later. These texts do not stand as eyewitness accounts, but as products of oral tradition, collected and reshaped generations after the events they describe. The earliest full hadith collections, including Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, were assembled in the 9th century, more than 200 years after Muhammad's lifetime. Surviving manuscripts of these works date from even later, sometimes by centuries. This enormous gap between event and record casts a long shadow over the reliability of the traditional narrative. Fred Donner, a leading historian, notes that this delay opens the door to political motives, retrospective editing, and the gradual construction of a shared story. The silence of the material record, paired with the late appearance of written tradition, invites a fundamental question. How much of what is believed today was truly known in the earliest decades, and how much was shaped by the needs of later rulers and scholars? Archaeologists tracking the earliest mosques across the Middle East have uncovered a pattern that complicates the story of Islam's beginnings. Precise surveys of ancient mosque foundations reveal that not all early mosques point toward Mecca. In fact, clusters of sites in Jordan, Syria, and parts of Iraq are oriented toward Petra or even due north, directions that defy the later standardized Qibla. The Great Mosque of Kufa, for example, shows an alignment that diverges by several degrees from the Meccan axis, while others in the Levant point closer to Jerusalem or Petra. Teams from Near Eastern archaeology journals have mapped these deviations, suggesting that early Muslim communities may have followed regional traditions or practical constraints rather than a single fixed direction. The evidence of shifting Qibla lines hints at a ritual landscape in flux, where the act of communal prayer was still being negotiated on the ground. These findings raise new questions about how early believers defined themselves, not just in texts, but in the very spaces where they gathered to worship. The Dome of the Rock, completed in 691, stands as the first monumental statement of the new faith, yet its inscriptions avoid the word Islam and instead proclaim the oneness of God, referencing Jesus as the Messiah, son of Mary. There is no mention of Muhammad as prophet or messenger in these bands of Kufic script. Angelica Neuwirth, a leading expert, notes that these texts echo a universal monotheistic message, not a fully defined Islamic creed. The absence of the later prophetic formula leaves the monument's message open, suggesting that even at the highest level, religious identity was still being shaped in public stone. Centuries of certainty now stand on shifting ground. As new evidence surfaces, the old story grows less absolute and the questions more urgent. History isn't fixed. Truth, it seems, is still under excavation.